Hi, welcome to the Gemara on Yud Amud Bet. We're starting from the words Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. This is a review video only, so there are no questions in this video. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, the words at the very beginning of Megillat Esther. It was in the days of Achashverosh. Amar Rabbi Levi v'itim Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Levi said, and some say it was Rabbi Yonatan who said, Tzavar zeh mesaret b'yadinu ma'anshei Knesset Hagdola. This thing is a tradition that we have in our hands, literally in our hands, a tradition that we have from the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, from the men of the Great Assembly. Kol makom shene'emar vayihi, any place where it says vayihi, eno el lashon tsar, that can only be the language of tsar, of distress. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hava Haman. So in the case of vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, we had Haman, and that's the tsar that existed. In root, it says Vayihi b'mei shvot hashoftim, was in the days that the judges ruled. Hava rav. So the first thing that happens in Megillat root is that there's a famine. Vayihi kehechel ha'adam laruv vayara Hashem ki rabah ra'at ha'adam. So this one is clear from Breshit that people were behaving badly. God saw that people were not behaving well. And that comes right before the flood. Vehi v'nisam mikedem hava nivnei lanu ir. This is the pasuk that precedes Migdal Bavel. They left Kedem and they said, let's build a city. Vehi b'mei Amrafel asu melchama. So it was in the days of Amrafel. This is a reference to the war in Breshit of the 4 kings against the 5 kings. So they fought a war. That's bad. And a reference to Sefer Yoshua right before he gets into a fight with an angel. Vayhi Hashem et Yehoshua v'yimalu bnei Israel. So that's a pasuk from the end of one chapter and then the beginning of the next one. God was with Yehoshua, which sounds like a good thing, but then right afterwards, Bnei Israel trespassed. They took from the spoils of war, which they weren't supposed to touch. It's also a blending of a few psukim, but it's the story of Chana, who was barren. So that's presumably the bad part of the story. V'Hashem sagar rachma. A story about Shmuel's sons not following in his ways, not following on his path. So that's a negative thing. Vayihi David l'chol drachav maskil. Vayihi Shaul uyen et David. So everything was going well for David, but then that meant that Shaul sort of cast a jealous eye on him, and that leads to negative things. Vayihi ki yashav hamelech bebeito, rak ata lo tivneh habayit. Also taking from a few different sources, but when King David was sitting in his house, so he gets told that he's not going to be the one to build the Beit HaMikdash. Again, a negative thing. Now the Gemara has a question. The haktiv, but doesn't it say in Vayikra, Vayihi bayom hashmini? It was on the 8th day, which is a reference to the dedication of the Mishkan. So isn't that a good thing? V'tanya, and we learn in a Braita, Oto hayom hayta simcha lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu kiyom shnivru bo shamayim va'aretz. That day was as happy for God as, was the happiness before God was as great as the day that the earth was created. K'tiv hacha, vayihi bayom hashmini, k'tiv hatam, vayihi boker yom echad. Right? It says, it's the same language, vayihi bayom hashmini, and vayihi boker yom echad, and that's actually used on all the days. Hashliv nadav v'avihu. No, we can explain that vayihi bayom hashmini. The answer is, this introduces the answer. The answer to that contradiction or question is, that's when Nadav and Avihu died, also on the day of the dedication of the Mishkan, so there was actually something negative on that day. The haktiv, but here's another challenge. Vayihi b'shmonim ve'arba me'ot shana. Another haktiv, another vayihi. V'haktiv vayihi ka'asher ra'aya kover Rachel. So all these are references to good things. V'haktiv vayhi erev vayivoker yom echad. And isn't it written also, there was evening and there was morning the first day? As we referenced earlier, right, that's a reference to creation, and that's actually a good thing. So why would that be introduced by he? So these are all good things that happened. Yaakov seeing Rachel, the Shmonim and Arba Mot Shana is about the time coming to build the Beit HaMikdash. So all these things are good things. The Ha'ika Sheni, and isn't there also the second day of creation? The Ha'ika Shlishi, and isn't there also the third day of creation? All these things say Vayihi. The Ha'ika Tuva, and aren't there actually many like this, many Vayihis that are good? Amar of Ashi, so Rav Ashi comes to solve this contradiction. Kol Vayihi ikahachi v'ikahachi. Every time it says the word Vayihi, ikahachi v'ikahachi, there are these and there are these, meaning some are good and some are bad. You can't depend on Vayihi always introducing something bad. Vayihi b'mei, but the words Vayihi b'mei, Eino el shon sar, that is always introducing something negative. Chamisha Vayihi b'mei havu. There are 5 Vayihi b'meis. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, Vayihi b'mei Shvot HaShoftim, we talked about those 2 already. Vayihi b'mei Amrafel, we talked about that one also. Vayihi b'mei Achaz, and Vayihi b'mei Yehoyakim. Those are the other 2 that are mentioned here, Achaz and Yehoyakim. So both of these are considered to be also negative stories. They all have a bad ending. Yehoyakim, the destruction of the temple. Achaz as well. Actually, it's, I think, Rashi who tells us here about the bad things that happen in all of these cases. But that's the main message, that these are all ones that ends up badly. Where in fact the Vayihi b'mei, it turns out that this did in fact lead to something negative happening. Again, Yehoyakim because the temple was destroyed. Achaz, just multiple bad things happening to Israel during that time. Okay, moving on to the next set of drashot. Amar Rabbi Levi, Davar zeh mesoret b'yadinu avotenu, amotz v'amat yachim havu. This is also a tradition that we have from our fathers, that Amotz and Amatzia were brothers. My Kamashmalan, what is this teaching us? Why do we care that these 2 people were brothers? Ki had Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Kol kala shehitznua b'veit chameha, zoche v'yotzim mimena melachim v'nevi'im. So we have a teaching that every daughter-in-law who's very modest in the house of her father-in-law merits to have kings and prophets descend from her. Minalan, from where do we learn this? From Tamar. Mitamar. Dichtiv, as it says in the pasuk, Vayireh Yehuda v'yachshaveh lezona, ki kista paneha. So Yehuda saw Tamar and thought that she was a zona, a prostitute, because her face was covered. Mishum de kasta paneha v'yachshaveh lezona, because her face was covered, he thought she was a prostitute. Like, that's kind of weird. Did prostitutes cover their faces? That's a strange thing to say. Ella, rather, Mishum de kasta paneha b'beit chamea. It was because she covered her face when she was in her father-in-law's house. So when she was actually in Yehuda's house as his daughter-in-law, that was when her face was covered. And so he didn't recognize her. So she merited, and her descendants were kings and prophets. Melachim mi David. Kings we know about from David. David was a descendant of Tamar's. Nevi'im and prophets to Amar Rabbi Levi. That's what's proven by the statement of Rabbi Levi. That's what that statement proves. Uktiv, and it says in Yeshayahu, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amotz. So Amotz was Yeshayahu's father, and Yeshayahu was in fact a prophet. The Amar Rabbi Levi. And Amatzia. So Amotz and Amatzia, both. Amatzia is a king according to Rashi, and Amotz, again, the father of a Navi, so that's how that gets proven. Next drasha, V'amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi said, Davar zeh mesoret b'yadinu avotenu. Another mesoret that we have, another tradition that we have from our forefathers. Makom aron ino min hamizah. The place of the aron was not measurable. It didn't take up physical space. Tanya nami hachi. We also have a brayta that proves this. Aron she'asa Moshe yesh lo 10 amot l'chol ruach. The aron that Moshe made had 10 amot on either side, meaning within the Mishkan there were 10 amot on either side of it. Uktiv, and it says, Malachim, v'lifnei hadvir 20 ma'orach, and there were 20 amot between, sort of within the Mishkan, before you got to the Dvir, which is the dividing wall to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the whole space was 20 amot, and the Aron had 10 amot on either side of it. That doesn't really leave any space for the Aron itself. Uktiv, knaf hakruv ha'achad eser amot, uknaf hakruv ha'achad eser amot. This is not really such relevant information for what we're discussing, but it also tells us that each wing of the wingspan of each kruv was 10 amot of each of the cherubs. Aron gufe hecha havakai. So the Aron itself, where was it standing? Again, if the whole space was only 20 amot, then you couldn't put a physical object there and have it have 10 amot on either side of it, unless it didn't take up any space. El alav, rather no, shmamina benes hayaomed. Word from here that it stood through a miracle. In other words, it was a miraculous use of space in the Mishkan, and in fact, the Aron did not take up any physical space. Okay, we'll stop here.